So my goal is to make an award-winning American Porter. In part 1 of my Road to Gold series, I walked through the recipe creation for this beer, and this time I'm going to brew it and see how it turns out. Spoiler alert, it turned out pretty nice. Well, thanks for stopping by Cascades Homebrew. My name is Brent. So as I mentioned in the first part of this series, I thought it'd be interesting and also good motivation for me to pick a style that I'd want to put into a competition. In this case, I picked an American Porter. So my goal was to design an American Porter recipe that I thought would do well in competitions, one that met the style guidelines, brew it, evaluate it. If it turns out well, try to get it in some competitions, otherwise maybe do some iterations on it to try to improve it. In the future, I might try the same thing for some other styles, so let me know if there's some styles you're interested in me tackling. So if you haven't seen the recipe creation video, I think it's worth taking a look. Don't worry, you can watch it after you finish this video. So while the video and the recipe there is an American Porter, really the same general steps apply to making a recipe for any style. So the steps I go through in that video are 1, kind of what are my goals? What are the characteristics that I would want in my recipe, in this case for an American Porter? 2, I go through some research, kind of looking at recipes, maybe even tasting some beers to see what I might like in American Porter or any style. So 3, develop a recipe framework. What are the kind of base grains I want? What are some of the specialty grains? What are the hops and yeast and water profile that I might want? So the final step is then using Brewing software to create the details of the recipe. That's going to be driven by the ideas I came up in the previous steps, but it also may be influenced by what grains do I have on hand or what ingredients? What are the things I can get at my local shop or get by mail order? So then, once I've created the recipe, I'm going to brew it, and that's what we're doing here. And then, after I get done, I'll evaluate it. Think of ideas, if the things maybe I want to change, and then I can iterate over, make those changes, brew it again. So okay, I kind of rambled on a lot about the recipe, so let's just get right into the brew day on this one. This is my Road to Gold Porter. Style is an American Porter, 20A. In this case, I brewed a 2.5 gallon into the fermenter batch, so 2.6 gallons or 10 liters into the fermenter. Bitterness was calculated at 40 IBUs, color 31 SRM. The recipe was written around a 73% efficiency, targeting an original gravity of 1060 with a final gravity 1014, which gave me an ABV of 6.0%. So the final grain bill on this one was around 73% of an American Pale 2-row malt. In this case, I used Montana Craft Malt, 10.8% of an Avant-Garde Munich malt, which is 15 Levobond. So that's the only thing that's not an American ingredient in this one. 8.3% of a Breeze Caramel Malt, 60 Levobond, 5% of a Breeze Chocolate Malt, which is 350 Levobond, 2.4% of Breeze Black Malt, which is 500 Levobond. The water profile for this one was pretty simple. I just want to build up my calcium a little bit, and which builds up my sulfate and chloride to kind of that 1-to-1 ratio. So I end up with a calcium calculated at 67, sulfate 71, chloride 75. The other values are what's in my tap water. So to get there, supporting the full volume mash, I need 3.6 gallons or 13.6 liters of tap water, and I add 1 gram of gypsum and then 1 gram of calcium chloride. I also add a little bit of potassium metabisulfite just to remove the chlorine and chloramine in my water. Note, for this batch, I don't need to do any pH adjustments. So with the water heated up to my target temperature, it's time to add in the milled grain. This batch is going to get a 60-minute mash at 154 degrees Fahrenheit. Measured the mash pH came out at 5.37. Boil for this one is going to be 30 minutes. So I've moved a lot of my hoppy beers to 30-minute boil, so I figured I'd give it a try for a 30-minute boil for this style of beer. It seemed like it worked out pretty well. At the end of the mash, I removed the grain bag. I let the wort drain and give it a squeeze to try to get out as much of that sweet wort as I can. So as the wort comes up to a boil, it's time to add in my hops. This one, 30-minute boil, so at the 30-minute mark, I add a tiny bit of Warrior, so 0.23 ounces or 9 grams to give me about 24 IBUs. With 10 minutes left in the boil, I add 1 ounce or 28 grams of Willamette hops, which gives me just over 16 IBUs. So note, I skipped adding either Irish Moss or Whirlflock for this one. I figured with a dark roasty beer, it's probably not going to make much difference. But I was curious if I would see any kind of difference in the clarity. I didn't really. I chilled the wort down to my target fermentation temperature. Then I transferred it in to my SS Brewtech 3.5 gallon fermenter. I used a strainer to help keep most of the hop matter out of the fermenter. So I measured about 2.7 gallons going to the fermenter, which was just a touch over my target of 2.6 gallons. The yeast for this one was 1 pack of Safal US05 from Fermentus. So I direct pitched that onto the wort. When I took a gravity reading, I was right on track with my original gravity of 1060. So I then moved the fermenter into my temperature-controlled chest freezer. So when I peeked in the next day around 22 hours after pitching, I saw signs of a healthy fermentation. I then added my blow-off tube and kept the fermenter sealed up. The fermentation schedule for this one started at 66 degrees Fahrenheit or around 19 degrees Celsius. Then on day 4, I gave it a boost up to 69 degrees Fahrenheit, around 20.6 degrees Celsius. I kegged it then on day 6. So this is not a style that's really fragile to oxidation like some hoppy beers, but a closed transfer to avoid oxygen exposure is my standard kegging process these days. Well, it looks like I didn't position the dip tube optimally during the transfer, so I got that little extra volume into the fermenter, but it stayed there, didn't make it into the keg. So looking at the stats on this one, the efficiency I measured at 76%, and note that was just because they had a little more volume. My original gravity was right on target at 1060. Attenuation, pretty close to target, 77.5%. So the final gravity measured at 1013 was pretty much on target. So the ABV on this one at 6.2% was pretty close to my target of 6.0%. So there's how the beer turned out. You're probably hard to see. It's got some really nice ruby highlights if you hold it up. It's definitely a very dark brown, but not black, not light brown, a dark brown with sort of ruby highlights, which is right on track with what I was wanting to do. So the head on it, it's a nice light tan, creamy head. So that's looking good. If we go in for aroma, oh, it's really nice. I definitely get sort of that chocolate, kind of a coffee, maybe a little bit kind of like a vanilla, maybe a little bit of a kind of a citrusy kind of thing. I'm not sure that could be from the hops, but I think it might just be just the interaction of the malt and all the different flavors. So it's really a wonderful smelling beer, so I'm really happy with that. What about the mouthfeel on this one? So the mouthfeel and sensations, I think those are pretty good. It's got a medium level of mouthfeel, maybe a little bit of kind of a creamy texture to it. It's not like a big thick beer, but it's also not a light beer either. It's got some, the carbonation is there. There's definitely a bitter component. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more when we get into the taste on it. So overall, I think the taste is really close to kind of what I was thinking. Up front, it's got that sweetness that kind of hits the tongue. It's got at the back end, it's got some lingering, kind of some roastiness to it. I would say the only negatives, kind of in the middle, you get a little bit of this kind of grainy harshness that kind of lingers a little bit. So I don't think it's not that off-putting. It's probably appropriate for the style. I'm not exactly sure what causes it. It might help as it ages a little bit. I definitely noticed when this beer was, I first tasted it, say at a week it was kegged, definitely had a little bit of harshness to it. But then when it got to about, say, 3 weeks in the keg, it really started coming together. It may improve with a little bit of age as well. As far as the bitterness and the hop level on it, I think it's right on track for an American porter. There's definitely some lingering bitterness. I get some citrusy character that I think could be from the Willamette. Maybe a little bit of earthy if I really kind of dig for it. With the initial tasting, is there anything I might change? I think a split batch, maybe with an English yeast versus the US05, that might be an interesting comparison, just to see if it gives it a little bit more sweetness, a little bit smooth it. Whether that's, say, SO4 or Liberty Bell. Liberty Bell is sort of one that I've tried that I think it really likes. That might be a good kind of bridge between kind of English-American type yeast. The grain on it, I'd definitely be interested in trying something maybe like some wheat in there, or like our roasted wheat or dark wheat. Looking at maybe some of those less bitter, less acrid kind of malts. Let me try it. But I think it's really close. So I wouldn't jump into a radical change of the grain bill. Again, so I think the water profile is pretty good. I think the grain bill is pretty close. I think the hop schedule on it is probably right on target. So one thing I found is a really good way to evaluate homebrew is to taste it blind with some commercial beers that are good quality beers. So I went ahead and I picked up, I think 4 or 5 commercial porters. So I'm going to try to do a tasting with that, get that on film. So that'll be come up pretty soon. I don't know if this exact batch will make it into a competition. Maybe I'll bottle up some, and if there's a competition that's handy, I'll go ahead and submit them, see about feedback. Otherwise, I'll plan to brew another batch and get that into some competitions. But I do hope in the future to cycle back after I've gotten some competition feedback. Maybe after I've brewed a couple batches, I've done some tweaks just to see where we end up, see if there's any changes what were my kind of feedback? What did I learn from some of the different batches, or what did I learn from competition feedback? So if that sounds interesting to you, or my other content with grain to glass and experimental batches, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks for dropping in. Cheers!